E ngā mana nā reo e rau rangatira mā ki te mana whenua, tēnā koutou. Ko tā Paul Callaghan te tangata, ko Callaghan Innovation te whare, Māori ora. Welcome everyone. I'm Katy, as just introduced, but today I'm going to talk around who is Callaghan Innovation, what do we do, and talk a little bit about the companies that we work with. I'm in a really privileged position where I get a kind of front row seat of what's happening right across the industry. And I'd like to share some insights and talk about how companies are tackling the big challenges. Because we can get excited about disruption and it can leave us high and dry after some of these events. You know change is happening, but what do we do about it? So I'd like to talk a little bit about how companies are starting to tackle some of these big challenges. So to start with, I'm going to get my CEO, Vic Crone, to talk about what we do.
The world is undergoing its fourth industrial revolution, and over the next 10 or 20 years, the way we live, work and do business will be vastly different. For New Zealand to thrive, we must seize the new opportunities this technological change offers. Callaghan Innovation is here to help make that happen. We are New Zealand's innovation agency. We activate innovation and we help businesses to grow faster for a better New Zealand. Our namesake, the visionary New Zealand scientist Sir Paul Callaghan, said that our country's brilliance comes from the weird stuff that others don't think to exploit. He said that 100 inspired New Zealand entrepreneurs can turn this country around. So we partner with ambitious businesses of all sizes to provide innovation and research and development services to suit their stage of growth. We have more than 200 of New Zealand's leading scientists and engineers dedicated to solving tough technical problems for our customers. We provide world-class advice and events and supply skills and capability development programs. We enable our customers to innovate with grants co-funding for R&D activities. And as a government agency, we actively connect people, opportunities and networks. We enhance the operation of New Zealand's innovation ecosystem for the benefit of all of us, helping to make Aotearoa a place where, in Sir Paul's words, talent wants to live.
So hopefully the clip that was shown shows that we're not just about food. We cover a range of sectors, and I'll talk to why that's important as we go on. We cover areas such as manufacturing and niche, energy and environment, transport and logistics, agri-tech, health and digital. And as I say those, hopefully you're thinking that those are all areas that you're thinking about in your companies. So increasingly, as I sit in a very multidisciplinary team, we draw upon expertise from right across those sectors to help the food and beverage industry. So our strength is very much in that multidisciplinary approach. And just a little known fact in terms of the companies we support, Rocket Lab just up the road in Mahia Peninsula started in our basement. They were in level 2, so we've got a really strong connection to this part of the world. So in 2011, Sir Paul Callaghan, our namesake, shared some of his views around where he thought the New Zealand economy could go. Now at that time, Sir Paul, a legendary physicist and scientist and commentator on the New Zealand economy, was suffering from leukemia, and he subsequently passed away. So it was really important for him at that time to share some of his insights. And I've got a little clip here to talk a little bit about him, because without those views, Callaghan Innovation wouldn't be here and we wouldn't be on a pathway towards innovation. So I'll just start. Just before I do, Sir Paul had about that time quite a few clips, so if it's interesting to you, there's a lot on YouTube and you can look him up afterwards.
Globalisation has meant that countries have got to make a living by playing to their strengths and doing what they're best at. And for a country like New Zealand, we've lived off our resources for about 150 years with farming and exporting agricultural produce. But we're coming to a situation now in our history where we're reaching limits to growth. Something like our dairy industry, which is a fabulous business, adds a lot of value to the New Zealand economy, is limited in the way it can grow because of the impact on our environment. And in a way, we've become a bit like a country like Singapore or perhaps Japan, where we have to think in terms of how would we grow our economy without resources? Because from now on, any expansion in our prosperity has got to come from a way of using our creative capacity, our educational system, our ability to innovate, so that we're getting value out of our knowledge without impacting further on our environment.
So I'll leave it there and start to talk about dairy, because that's come up a few times. Makes up 28% of our economy. As we said earlier, food and fibre sector takes up over 50% of our export earnings. So dairy is 2.5 times bigger than meat, 3 times bigger than wood, and 10 times bigger than wine. And so with Sir Paul Callaghan talking about the environmental limits of our natural resources and acknowledging they're a valuable part of our economy, we think to Julia talking earlier in the day about Dean Foods, the biggest dairy company in America, filing for bankruptcy in the last week. And while water was one of the challenges around that business, also very much the social media and the commentary this week has been about them not reacting to plant-based foods. And I think I look at it slightly differently because I look at our very own A2 milk. They now have a market capitalisation of almost $10 billion. They're bigger than Meridian Energy, bigger than Auckland Airport, and double the size of Fletcher Building. So what has A2 got right, and what did Dean Foods in the US get wrong? Or what are some of the kind of indicators we can take from that? And I think this isn't about the merits of plant-based proteins versus dairy. It's very much around an example of a company that has taken industry challenges and global trends and seen an opportunity to transform its value proposition. And that's something that's come up throughout today around where is the value and how are we harnessing it. And now it's interesting because the scientific community was really sceptical about A2 milk. There wasn't enough evidence to say around what its impact could be. But consumers really jumped onto the message, and really amazingly, or a really good outcome has been that the science has backed up their claims. So just that's kind of setting the scene for some of the discussion points I'll go through. I'll just talk a little bit around my background. I started my career in power electronics for PDL in Napier, for those of you who know it. It's subsequently been bought by Schneider. They've still got a big R&D centre there. But since then, I've worked right across the food and beverage industry. I've worked in beer, wine, spirits, soft drinks, water, in the dairy industry, casein, whey, ice cream, pizzas, burgers, sauces, beef, chicken, you name it. And it's not going on about it, but what that does is give me context in this role, because I've worked in a range of roles, from sales to operations, marketing, engineering. And it means, I think, that it gives me an appreciation of the diversity of innovation that's happening across the sector. And also it's meant that an appreciation of the fact that innovation is happening right across businesses. Quite often when we talk about it, we talk about new products, how are we going to get products into market, but innovation's happening right across businesses. And at Callaghan we talk a lot about the Dublin model. So hopefully some of you may have seen this. We talk about the 10 types of innovation. So in the centre you can look over there at what is the offering, and that's very much around what are the product attributes that you have. But increasingly companies that are successful in their innovation are looking at the configuration of their company. What are their channels to market? What are they doing differently around their profit model? And on the right, what is the experience a consumer is having with your products? And this talks to very much, we talk about Netflix, we talk about Uber and how they're changing. And in Auckland, I'm seeing Uber Eats grow as a company. And that's really interesting. Obviously, you've got a restaurant or a food place that's making food. You can look at it on your phone, dial up, order it, and an Uber will come and drop it at your house. But we're starting to see a disruption in the restaurant scene in Auckland, where ghost kitchens are starting up, or restaurants are labelling themselves as both an Italian and a Mexican, although only offering Italian to their people coming into the shop. So I could potentially start up Katie's Kai from my kitchen at home and set it up with an Uber thing and starts sending it out. So it is impacting restaurants in central Auckland. It is this level of disruption, although small, is showing what's happening. It's happened on a larger scale in London and in the UK, and we're starting to see Uber are now getting all the data from where those deliveries are going. So when we're seeing, they know exactly who's buying curry, who's buying Thai food, how the frequency, the socioeconomic data around those companies. So they're turning into a data insights company, and they're now looking at getting into restaurants themselves. So you've got the taxi company essentially becoming a food company, and so we're seeing this change, and that's just an example of how companies are looking differently at their offering. This is actually a Tony Seba quote. It comes from the paper that we were talking about earlier that Julia mentioned. It was quite a challenging report that he put out there talking about disruption in the future. But I think it's important to think about this. An unstoppable trifecta of fast improving technology, new business models and fast falling costs is creating the deepest, most consequential disruption of food and agriculture in 10,000 years. It is very much a drop the mic moment. And Tony Seba is a futurist that's come out, and we've brought him out a few times to New Zealand. It is provocative, but I think the point he makes around the cost of technology coming down and the adoption starting to happen and the need for New Zealand to take that on board is very relevant. At Callaghan, we work with an array of companies, and there are some major themes that are coming through when we're talking about change. And I'm going to talk about just 3 of them. Health and wellness is one, and it's been talked about today. Economic wellness and what this means to a business, and environmental wellness. So again, not just about the product. From a health perspective, foods are increasingly seen as having a greater function than just feeding us. As functional foods, from fermented foods to manuka honey to brain drinks giving us mental alertness, foods for wellness and health are on the rise. What this trend presents food and beverage companies is an opportunity for us to identify and validate the health benefits of our foods. And this is, talked about it earlier, something that can happen to any of our primary produce. So I'm going to talk about that some more. Nutritional poverty. We're at an interesting point in time where we seem to have this global trend towards plant-based foods. Yet Kiwis are eating less fruit and veggies than ever. So we're recognising a serious obesity and health problem, and it's startling to see the figures. And if we look into the Māori and Pacifica communities, it can go up to 60%. So this is a major challenge for New Zealand. And look, it's a complex discussion. There's kind of concepts around social inequity, affordability of food, and what is clear is it will require a community and a country response to solve. But the food industry does play a role in it. And as Abby mentioned earlier, we're moving from a curative medicine approach to a preventative, and food will play a really key role in that. I've been involved in something called the High Value Nutrition Science Challenge. About 10 years ago, the government science advisor, Sir Peter Gluckman, put some big challenges to the government and said, we need to put some science behind this. And there are 11 big challenges. But one of them was the High Value Nutrition Science Challenge. And that looked at what are the big challenges that we're going to face. And they kind of boiled it down into 4 areas. And they looked at digestive health and that connection between the gut and brain axes, looking at immune health, metabolic health, talking again about weight and diabetes, and infant health. So these 4 areas are being studied, and companies, we've got First Light Foods here in Gisborne, who are looking at, are there some health benefits around Wagyu grass-fed beef grown in New Zealand that could be good for the world? So they've begun a journey of working with this science program to look at proving that, because this may be the differentiator for New Zealand. It's not the clean green New Zealand. That's kind of a hygiene factor. We need to get that right, but we also need to be able to prove what's good. So if we can prove health outcomes from the wonderful produce that comes from our regions, this could be a game changer for New Zealand. And when I talk about the High Value Nutrition Science Challenge and the obesity epidemic we're facing, we're not alone. So Southeast Asia and China are right behind us, or right in front of us almost. So, and they've got what they've discovered through studies is the Asian genetic makeup means they're predisposed towards fat around the organs, and the term that they use is thin on the outside, fat on the inside. So while it's not obvious that there's big parts of the population suffering from metabolic health issues, they know that there's a tsunami of diabetes coming. So Zespri are also involved in this science program, looking at the digestive health and some of the other health benefits of their foods, as Asia is one of our main export countries that we go into. So that's kind of from a science perspective and validating health benefits. But I'd also like to talk about some of the innovators that are seeing an opportunity. We've got Arepa, which is Angus Brown, a young entrepreneur in Auckland, who is looking at how to grow a business using science as the base. So he's looking at what are the nutritional benefits and the ingredients, taking berries and the phytochemicals that are in them that are good for us, and looking at pine bark extracts, and has formulated something on paper that looks good. But where I've been really impressed and where he's doing incredibly well is backing that up with validated clinical trials. And that product is continuing to grow. So it's an example of an entrepreneur who sees the opportunity. Nuku Ki Te Puku is a Māori food and beverage cluster that Callaghan Innovation helped support in the early days. It's a collective of Māori trusts, entrepreneurs and iwi around the country. And it's a group that saw an opportunity in high value nutrition when we sat down and talked about it. And when we've got Ngāti Porou in the region who's also involved in this group, but saw an opportunity to how do you de-risk, or how do you get into this science kind of area, because it's not something that they had been doing. And one of the real challenges was, how do you go back to your board and say, well look, the future's coming, we need millions of dollars to get into it. And we talked about it for some time, and the group came together as a collective and said, well, what if we set up a company together and we each put some money in, and as an entity, as a group, a collective wanting to do something, then joined in the High Value Nutrition Science Challenge. And that group has been running now for 2 years, and they're working on high value ingredients and products for China. And off the back of that, there's a whole lot of other projects. So more than the products that are coming out, which will be successful, it's the model and how a collective or a collaborative approach is moving them into a new area. And I'd also like to talk about Sanford's. So they're another company that we work with. They've had hockey skins that are coming off the production line. They were just going into offal bins and not being used. And they knew this was a problem, but what were they going to do about it? And they started to work with Plant and Food Research, a science organisation, around how do you extract the collagen out of it. And some of these things, it's all about timing, because the commercial model's got to work, right? So while you get no money for it, it doesn't make sense. But they have worked with them, and they were able to extract the collagen. They then started working with a company called Revolution Fibres in Auckland, who do nanospinning. So you send an electrical current through the collagen and you start to turn it into a thread, and then you can turn this into a matrix, which kind of creates a scaffold. So you've gone from something that was going into the bin into something, a medical product that's now highly valuable. Now the collagen can go into your skin and be used as a beauty product, but it's also a scaffold for other nutritional products. And I think there's everything from cannabis to all kinds of things, manuka being looked at, that could be incorporated into that. So that's an example of two companies that are really pushing into the health space. And I have to say there's an awful lot more that are doing it too. So when I talk about economic wellness, it's around how do we keep our businesses ready for the future. Smart manufacturing's coming, robots, automation, For New Zealand to be competitive, we need to keep pace, and our business success depends upon it. Now, not all of us have got big factories running multiple lines. A lot of them are quite small, and we're working with small and medium enterprises to look at putting sensors into their machines to understand more about what's going on. We're looking at improving efficiency. Businesses tend to focus on a specific unit of operation quite often, or a return on investment of a single product. But once you start collecting data, whether it's small parts from one part of the operation to the whole way through, you can start to reimagine your operations and look at how you set it up. And the cost of technology has dropped significantly. So stuff that was prohibitive is now very available to companies. I'm just trying to think. We also have a range of tools and offerings that we work with companies on. We have things like cobots. So now I know particularly in a lot of our horticulture and primary industries, seasonal labour is an issue. And these cobots are able to go into some of the pack houses or into some of the operations to do support tasks that would have required a person. We have a UR5 that can go out into companies and you can use it. But where companies are finding it, and that's interesting, and you can learn and decide to buy that model or something else, but it also gives you an idea of what are the skills you're going to need in your company to use this equipment. Somebody needs to be able to program the robot. So it gives you an idea of what are we going to have to look for in the future. So when we talk about digital transformation, there are companies adopting technology, but we've also got some really amazing companies creating technology and exporting it to the world. Compact Sorting is a company that we work with who have been incredibly good at optical sorting. So kiwi fruit and apples coming through pack houses, they're able to do that sorting that Matt was talking about earlier today. They are increasingly putting smarts into their tools that connect right through the value chain. Food fraud was spoken about today. We work closely with a company called Trust Codes and others. But Trust Codes are an interesting New Zealand startup that the founders came out of credit card fraud. So they'd been developing algorithms to work out where credit cards were being used around the world fraudulently. And that same applies for food. So they had a really strong IP base before they began and have now grown capability with blockchain and other techniques, and are working closely with a lot of our primary producers, but also our infant formula manufacturers. So we're starting to see a real range of technologies and New Zealand companies addressing the big challenges. I'm going to also talk about environmental wellness, and I've taken some facts here from Love Food, Hate Waste website. Roughly 1/3 of the food produced in the world for human consumption every year, approximately 1.3 billion tonnes, gets lost or wasted. New Zealanders throw away almost 160,000 tonnes of food a year. That is equivalent to 271 jumbo jets of food that has to go somewhere to rot instead of being eaten. All of this food is worth almost 1.2 billion each year. That amount of food could feed the population of Dunedin for almost 3 years. And I bring that up because when we were earlier talking about nutritional poverty and the fact that we're not eating the right foods at the right time, it feels like we've got an imbalance in our food system. Earlier this year, I was lucky enough to go up to the Netherlands with a delegation of food producers and visit KPMG's head office. And one of the things that I really recall from that meeting, it truly dawned on me that the big accounting firms that have been around financial management and financial auditing systems were rapidly pivoting into sustainability auditing. So they're looking at not only saying that you're doing better things in sustainability, but you're actually proving it. And not only are you talking about what you're doing with your waters, how you're treating your people, so human welfare, animal welfare, are all being audited. A recent PwC study of more than 700 multinational companies found 72% were using the Sustainable Development Goals developed by the UN, which are a framework to kind of assess yourself against, while only 23% included meaningful KPIs or targets. But we expect this to rise. Food and beverage companies can use this framework as a gauge to prepare, but New Zealand's kaitiakitanga values are well aligned, and this evolving view is game-changing for innovation. So we're already doing a lot of this stuff. We just need to tell our story around how we're doing it. Climate change is something that comes into it as well. Wakatua, one of the incorporations that I've worked with in Nelson, and that's when you have Wakatua have a 500-year intergenerational plan, so they are looking to the future, and climate change becomes a really big priority. So these are measures they're looking at, but this week they've got a Danish delegation of climate change experts down in their region. They've worked with the Mayor of Nelson and they've declared a climate change emergency, and the whole region is coming together around what climate change might mean. And this impacts food producers, right? So if you want your children to be experiencing the life we have in 100, 200, 500 years, we need to be preparing for it now. The two pictures that I've got to the left there are taken out of annual reports. So one is Synlay's annual report and the other is Sanford's. So New Zealand companies are reporting on these Sustainable Development Goals, and we're seeing more of it. So when we talk about food waste as an area that I mentioned earlier, we're seeing communities redeploy services around solving some of the food waste challenges. And I've got Paul and my team working with the Aoraki food cluster in Timaru around how that group of companies in that area might solve food waste. And I think it's an interesting discussion because we're here in Gisborne and there's a very similar makeup of companies. So in Timaru, they've got McCain's, DB Breweries, Sanford's, Barker's, Heartland Chips, Silverfern Farms, Juice Products New Zealand, all coming to the table and showing the waste streams that they have coming out of their companies. And it's not just food. I know Sanford's rocked up with how many fishing nets that they had there, and how might we all work together to do something. And I think it's quite an interesting point from a food waste perspective. I was talking to Stefan earlier, quite often you'll have a single stream of food that it doesn't make sense to do anything with. But if there's a community of people that have different waste streams, maybe there's an additional business, or maybe there's something that can be done together. And at Callaghan, we've got the Bioresource Processing Alliance. We're hosting a government-funded project to support companies looking at what to do with their bio-waste. So it's something to note. But here we've also got Rebel Bakery in the Wairarapa, a company that's looking at how do they become more circular in the food that they do. They're currently importing cricket flour from Canada, but working on how might they, and that's proven that Kiwis actually like it. They've got a hemp product and a cricket wrap that's on the market, and are growing crickets, so they hope to be sustainable and use potentially some of their food waste to feed the crickets to go back in. So different people are doing different things. And the last picture down the bottom there is a young entrepreneur in Auckland, Michael Garvey. She's got a great food app that she's developed, working with cafes and restaurants around Auckland with their leftover food or the food getting near the end of the day. Cafes can list it. I can look on my phone and it pops up that there are cheap custard squares around the corner should I want to go and do them. It is an interesting point. Cafes are a little bit nervous around using it sometimes because your reputation is related to the food, and what if people don't have 100% experience. But it is something that we're working through, or I think the country is working through, that there are going to be compromises on how we address food. So the kind of three themes that we're looking at are around human well-being, economic well-being and planetary well-being. I've just aligned them there to some of the Sustainable Development Goals. So companies that are addressing some of these are already on the path to doing something. So I thought I'd just I'm near the end now, so I'm just finishing with, what are some of the top tips for food and beverage innovation? I'd say check out Larry Keeley's 10 Types of Innovation for some serious thoughts about your business value proposition, now and into the future. If it is of interest, we've got things at work, but there's also very readable books on it. Take a look at the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. Companies are using this as a framework to report on their sustainability. How do you fare? Can you integrate these business goals in reporting? Think about how you can utilise R&D to add value or validate health and nutritional claims. What's the opportunity for you or your competitors? You don't have to go all out on R&D. There are grants available to take on students and postgraduate talent for projects that you may not have managed to prioritise yet. We've got summer experience grants where we're funding students to go and work in companies for 10 weeks over summer. We've got career grants that you can access where we'll pay for somebody to come and work for you for 6 months, finishing their Masters or PhD, through to a fellowship. If you want somebody to do a really big project and do a PhD study on it, we will support the student to do that. And manufacturers should be thinking about how to collect valuable key data from machines or across their processes. So they're just some key tips. And I just thought I'd talk a little bit around Scale Up New Zealand. So some of the companies I've spoken about, or some of the areas, we've got startups that are on this platform. So it's scaleup.nz. And you can start to see some of the really innovative companies that may be of interest. It also shows their investment portfolio, or for investors, if you're looking for investors, it'll profile your company. So that's a little bit about Callaghan. I haven't done a big talk on all of our services, and I'm happy to take questions afterwards. We do rely very much on our regional partners, the Nickies and the Wendy's and the team here in the room to support us. And they're a good front door into the services we provide. And I just thought I'd finish lastly with Angus, the innovator that I spoke about earlier, and a little video of him talking.
After losing some loved ones to cognitive-related illnesses and seeing friends and family struggle with anxiety and nervousness under moments of pressure, I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could produce a brain drink or a smart drink that could help with moments like that? Caffeine and sugar is associated with peak performance, and so we wanted to disrupt the energy drink market by providing something that was natural, caffeine-free, and could help with cognitive function. Arepa is New Zealand's first smart drink. It's scientifically designed to help support mental clarity during moments of pressure and stress. Our success so far has been that we are now in over 50 supermarkets nationwide and about 200 cafes. We are starting to export. We have just had our first patent approved, and we are working towards our second patent. It was really important for us that at least one of the ingredients was from New Zealand. Working with a world-renowned neuroscientist gave us two. One is a New Zealand pine bark extract, and the other is a New Zealand blackcurrant extract. The future of Arepa is to be exporting around the world, to represent New Zealand on the world stage, and to ideally, hopefully, become the world's most iconic brain health brand. Advice for other founders would be to never give up, trust your gut, politely hustle, do your homework, and make sure that your product is fit for the market and future-proofed.
And just before I finish, I'd just like to say that Angus has used the Food Innovation Network, so the team here and the facilities around the country were very important in Angus getting his product to market. So, are there any questions?
I'm interested in is it the Aoraki collective in Timaru about the food waste, how that was initiated, and if we wanted to emulate that here, how we might go about it.
Well, it's the Economic Development Agency in the area saw it as a priority, so they have help support bring it together. I've spoken to them and said there may be a group in Gisborne that may be interested, and they are super keen to share what they're doing and talk to you. But it's a collective between the Canterbury University is supporting it from a science perspective. We're helping where we can with our services, and the local Economic Development Agency. So it's a real community collaborative project.
Great, Steve. Any other questions for Katy? No? Brilliant. Well,
Cool.
thank you. And